Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and thank you so much for taking an interest in your community. You're going to be seeing a presentation tonight regarding the comprehensive plan for the South Norwalk Train Station, and it's a plan being developed by the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency in partnership with the City of Norwalk. There are a lot of exciting things happening here, and I hope that you enjoy the presentation, and please be sure to ask any questions that you may have. We're trying to reach out to the public to get feedback that's so important for us when we make plans of this nature. So again, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Brian Bedoli. I'm the Executive Director for the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency, and thank you, Mayor, for the introduction. Tonight, we're going to be going over a rather exciting opportunity in terms of how the current train station area at South Norwalk operates and what its potential is for the future. So before we get into the sort of meat of the presentation, I wanted to go over a few themes that are sort of helpful in framing and understanding the context in which we're working. So the first sort of key theme that we've identified as part of this is just the general opportunity that exists. Within this context, it's really broken sort of into two specific opportunity areas. You have the development opportunity. That is, there's a number of land uses around the station. There's a lot of, obviously needs that exist around the station and how it's utilized by residents and commuters, but also a community opportunity. We want to take a look at, how do we take a look at and assess the needs of the community and assess those within the context of this overarching land use potential that we have. There's not a lot of places in the Northeast that are so directly related to a train station with the development potential and the number of publicly owned or controlled assets that exist such as the South Norwalk Train Station. So there's a great opportunity in Norwalk that's unique to Norwalk and is really an asset for the community. And the theme of tonight is to really take a look at those and what can we do in that regard and promote responsible real estate development. And what I mean by responsible real estate development is really focused on balance. How do we take a look at the existing infrastructure, but look at that concurrent to what the needs in the community are, and make sure that when we do look at future development potential, we're addressing as many of those needs as possible. So really taking a look at the economic benefit, there's a tremendous economic potential in the area, but we want to balance that with the social and environmental aspects and the needs of the community. So one of the other key themes is obviously trying to balance these assets that we have with the overall needs of the community. And finally, the third theme that you'll see that runs throughout this presentation is in regards to coordination. You have a number of city departments and state departments and federal agencies that are interested in development around the South Norwalk train station. And we want to make sure that the work we do is coordinated so that we're all, working together to try to identify and understand cohesively what the community needs and how we can deliver that. And this is important if you want to advance to the next slide, because redevelopment, has been thought of as a thing of the past, right? It has its origins in the 1950s. But really what the research shows is this is actually something of the future. Based in total, in the overall nationwide, it's expected that over the next 30 years, more than $30 trillion is expected to be invested in rebuilding the existing built environment. And that's important because it's not like your typical greenfield development looking for new opportunities for land. It's rebuilding and infill opportunities such as those that are around the South Norwalk train station. And this is notable because this is more than half of US construction spending. So really, I just wanted to frame the overall opportunity that we have in front of us as a community and how we can benefit it is up for this discussion. We want to figure out what the needs are, what what your interests are, and how we can align those with this overall development interest and potential.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Brian. I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about what we're going to achieve with the rest of our meeting this evening. And from what the mayor mentioned, as well as Brian mentioned, there's a lot of wonderful opportunities to think about potential for the neighborhood, for the economic development perspective, for mobility. And we're really excited to listen to a lot of the comments that we're going to hear later on this evening. In terms of our agenda, what I'd like to do is just point out a couple of the key, I'm sorry, let me go back one slide here. Couple of key aspects that we're going to walk you through this evening. We're going to spend some time as a team going through a couple of polling questions. where we'd like to understand who's joining the meeting this evening, a little bit about your background, maybe how long you've lived in the community, and a little bit about what you know about the train station area itself. After that polling exercise that we're going to be doing, exercise number 1, you're going to hear from the consultant team that has been hired by the city to be able to help out understanding a lot of the technical issues that go in doing a study like this. So I am Jeffrey Morris Logan. I'm from a firm called VHB, and we're hired to really help out from the urban design, development, and placemaking perspective. I'm also joined this evening by Lisa DiTorrante, who's also from VHB. She's going to be helping explain some of the transportation and transit aspects of this area. And third, I'm also joined by Eric Halverson. He is from a firm called RKG. They're looking at this area specifically from a market and from an economics perspective as well. So we're excited to share those different viewpoints with the community over the next 20 to 30 minutes to be able to really engage in a really robust conversation in the second half of the meeting. So with those presentations about existing conditions, we'll have a couple of polls where we'll ask for some of your preferences about development, about streetscape, about placemaking, and about transit. And then after that, we're going to open it up for general Q&A and discussion rather at the end, where we're going to really be listening carefully to the comments that you have this evening as well. And then lastly, we'll close it out with a final polling question and exercise, just to share a little bit about what we've reflected upon together as we go through the conversation this evening. In terms of the project overview, Jess, let me invite you to join the conversation here and talk a little bit about how and why we're doing this with the study today.
Great, thanks, Jeffrey. We can advance to the next slide. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Vonashek, and I'm the Chief of Economic Community Development with the City of Norwalk. And I wanted to join the team here and provide a little bit of context as to how and why we're studying the train station area and why now, the timing of it. So over the last year and a half or so, we've had many different stakeholders approach both the redevelopment agency and the City of Norwalk to show interest and express interest on different types of projects in and around an area that surrounds the train station. And of course, these conversations happened organically over time, where we heard from some private developers, including One Chestnut and Bates Court, which we know are currently under development. We also heard from the Norwalk Housing Authority on some modernization projects. We've heard from the Second Taxing District, SNU, on a property that they own adjacent to the train station. And as we were hearing from different stakeholders in and around the area, we started to understand that all of these properties and all of these parcels are adjacent to one another. And it lends itself to being very thoughtful about how we want to advance the city's assets and also advance the city neighborhood with help from stakeholders and residents such as yourself. So we had a really unique opportunity to be able to think about all the stakeholders at the table and bring partners together to be able to explore what that development activity looks like. And I think that as we explain the geography, and Jeffrey gets into that a little bit more and shows the designated districts in which make up this geography, I think you'll start to see why it came together. But from the standpoint of what we see here, we know that we passed the POCD, which is the Plan for Conservation and Development, in December 2019. And in that plan, we talked a lot about not only how the neighborhoods grow and are developed, but really the need and the thoughtfulness of affordable housing stock, of connectivity and transportation, the importance of livability, the importance of walkability, the importance of a choice of transportation modes, a choice of housing options. And as we began to think and talk with all of the stakeholders who were coming to us with interest for this particular area, we knew that this area really needed a planning exercise. And so the redevelopment agency graciously took the lead to be able to guide us through this path and down this path. And I'm hoping that that gives a little bit of context as to how you see the map before you and how that came about. So it's been about a year and a half with different conversations at different times, but that helped us pull together this particular map that you see before you.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Jess. Appreciate the overview. And as I mentioned before, it's exciting to be thinking about this whole area around the station and how important it is to so many of the users and the residents and the businesses as well. So in terms of getting us acclimated and oriented to the study and the topic areas for this evening, this map here shows several of the critical sites that we're going to be looking at. They're listed on the screen 1 through 6 here. From the station, the train station itself is item number 1. There are a couple of development sites under item number 2 in terms of the Chestnut Street block itself and multiple sites there. Under item 3, there's the Lexington Ely Street area itself in terms of the existing buildings and the different sites that are there. Sites 4 and 5 are really dedicated towards, 4A and 4B are dedicated towards private development that you might have seen along MLK Boulevard. And then 5 is the SNU facility and 6 is the Housing Authority. So for the purposes of this evening, we're really going to be focusing in on those sites as well as how those sites relate to the surrounding neighborhood and context and how important they are to relate to each other. As Jess mentioned early in the process, and we've been involved from the consultant team for the last couple of months, it's important to understand that there's a lot of goals that are shaping this plan. Jess mentioned many of them from the citywide perspective, but there are some that are specific to the study area itself, about understanding how the reuse of the South Norwalk Railroad Station as a multimodal hub transportation activity, really understanding how it can be better connected through its transit operations. The idea to identify better connections to the neighborhood with people who live, work, and play around the area and get them connected to the station. A goal of replacing at a 1-to-1 ratio the affordable housing that's in this area and maybe even exceed that ratio. Looking for the alternative for the South Norwalk electric and sewer station, and understanding that if that site gets redeveloped, maybe there could be a new place for some of those facilities, and that might open up new development. And then understanding things like infill development, especially on sites that are existing and vacant today. The idea of historic preservation and how historic preservation is going to be important, especially to the neighborhoods closer to the water, and about accommodating things like building improvements and facade improvements. And ultimately, our goal is to have a vision for this area that shows it at its full potential as well. In terms of other key goals here, identifying some of the highest and best use of this area, you can imagine how limited of a resource the area is in terms of some of the land and development around a train station. How can we maximize that use and get the best benefit out of it for all is an important part of this. The key to doing that is understanding parking, infrastructure, and other supportive features that really will make these sites come to life over time. We also want to look at understanding public and private roles and partnerships that could be created along the way to really find opportunities to move these sites forward. In terms of funding, health, equity, economic development opportunities, all of those are really important to understanding the vision for this site as well. And as Jess mentioned, a lot of this ties back to the citywide planning efforts around the plan of conservation and development as well. In terms of what we've already started to observe with the committee as well as with the consultant team, is this is a wonderful part of the city. You can see here in the area that's shown in red, that is the core study area that I showed you, those 6 sites. And in terms of some of the great opportunities that this location affords, from having the downtown and the North Main Street activity, the vitality of the businesses and the shops just to the north, to having the waterfront and the industrial users and the jobs just to the east, to having the South Main Street spine of those neighborhood-oriented businesses and local housing and so forth is really important as a spine along South Main Street. Knowing that the Housing Authority has been actively involved, especially in the last few years, about redevelopment and investments in the different sites that are around this area as well. And the idea that redevelopment and transition of this area, especially as you head out towards the east of the train station site, we've seen a lot of recent indicators about new development, growth, and how the future could afford many things for many different users and people that are living in this area as well. And lastly, and probably most importantly, What we'd love to hear this evening is any comments about what we call historic preservation, the historic neighborhoods. It's really all about the people who live in the surrounding neighborhoods here. That's really important, and when we undertake an exercise like this. So with that as a background and as a backdrop, what we'd love to do now is to take a few seconds and go into some of our early polling exercises. This is the opportunity for people to log on to the internet, open up your web browser, get onto your phones and be able to join the conversation. And we're going to have some live polls that happen here as well. And because a lot of this is going to be translated, I'm going to spend a few minutes on this slide to make sure that there's ample time for people to be able to log in. We have two options on how you can join the polling that's going to happen this evening. One of the first options is if you join via the internet. Under option one, if you go to pollev.com, you can join the polling exercise there. And when asked for the username, you will put in Jeffrey MORR 718. So go to pollev.com and enter Jeffrey MORR 718. What that will do is it'll put you into the waiting room for the polls that get started. The second option is to go to enter on your text on your phone. So to the number 37609, that's the number that you will put in. You will enter that number into your phone on the text, and then you'll text the word Jeffrey MORR 718 as shown on the screen. You text that word to that number. So again, I'm going to stay here one more time. Option number one is you go to pollev.com and enter the word as shown on the screen, Jeffrey MORR 718. And the second option is to text the word Jeffrey MORR 718 to the number 37607. And when you get there, the way that you will know that you've succeeded in getting to that location is that your screens should look like this. There's a screen that shows the person that's arrived under the .com through the website, as well as text saying that the meeting's about to start. So with that in mind, we're going to start and get into some of the polls. And the poll number one, and people can answer this at any point in time. Feel free to answer from A through F. We'd love to find out, the question here is, how long have you lived in Norwalk? And at any point in time on any of these questions, you can answer the polls as we go through this. And I'm going to give this first question a little bit more time for people to get acclimated. And what I will do for each of these questions is, as I'm going to close them out, I will give a countdown of 3, 2, 1. This is great. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of people that have joined the conversation. 25% do not live in Norwalk, so it's great to have some visitors from outside of the neighborhood as well. Okay, so now that this is settled in, again, we have a lot of people who've been here for 20 plus years, so you are the experts in our minds from living in this area for so long. And it's great that there's some people that have only been here for a few years. It's great to get the fresh perspective on living in the neighborhood as well. So I'm going to close that in 3, 2, 1. Let's go on to the next question. So as I mentioned, at any point in time, you can answer the questions and feel free to dive in and answer the poll. So this one here is, what is your age range? We like to find out in these types of meetings, not only how long have you been in the community, or what is also your age range as well, here as well. So let me give that a few minutes. And again, you can click on this as quickly as you'd like here. So it's interesting to see that we have a significant amount of the population that's over 50 in the population here. And this also tells us a little bit about the outreach. Clearly, we want to hear a lot from the community as we go through this process. So this helps us understand where we might need to go back and get a little bit more outreach in terms of people's age and demographics. So I'm going to close this one in 3, 2, 1. The next question we have, what mode of transportation do you use the most? Again, this is the one that you use the most. Here, we're trying to understand in terms of how people walk, bike, drive, take the bus or the train? What is the predominant way that people navigate around the neighborhood or the city? This will tell us in terms of where there might be challenges to overcome about if people want to walk more, maybe we need better facilities. If you want to get access to the bus station, the bus areas or the train, maybe we need to make improvements there as well. So I'm going to close this one in 3, 2, 1. The next question that we have for you, and this is going to be interesting because of the results of the last question. How often do you use the train station to commute or to travel? Is it 5 times a week? 1 to 2 times a week? Does it vary? Maybe once a month? Is it 4 or 6 times per year, or perhaps never? So let's take a few seconds and answer these questions. So again, not as surprising given the results from the last question about how people move around, that's really limited throughout the year or maybe even never as well. So maybe the questions are how important, are some of these mobility questions to you from a neighborhood perspective in your walkability.
Jeffrey, can I step in just for 1 sec? We got a question asking if it's before the pandemic or during the pandemic.
Yeah, I would thank you for that question who posed that. I would say probably before the pandemic, realizing that this last 6 to 9 months has been very unique, for lack of a better word. So I would say this is before the pandemic. Would be interesting. Thank you for that, Jess. Okay, so I'm going to close this one in 3, 2, 1. Next question here, thinking ahead about the future. What do you think will make the train station area better? And it could be any of the items here, but we're asking you to help prioritize by picking one. Is it about the drop-off and pickup area, for example, under A? Areas for buses, B. And maybe improvements for the shuttle bus area, C. Improved parking, D. Facilities for walking like sidewalks and areas to wait and congregate and seating. Under F is areas improvements for biking. G is understanding things like plazas and spaces for people to wait and gather. H is about economic development and growth, maybe things like housing, offices, and retail. I is perhaps all of the above. And J is really if you're not sure or other. So again, this is a great indicator for us about where people think some of the major areas for improvement might need to take shape around the station as well. And clearly we have 57% or more of the folks participating thinking that it's all of the above. So I'm going to close this one in 3, 2, 1. So with that, and thank you for answering those questions. It really helps us give us really good indicators of who's joined the meeting tonight, some of your early preferences as we talk through this evening. We're going to have more polls like that ahead of us as we continue with the conversation this evening as well. But what I'd like to do is invite Eric from RKG Associates. He's one of the consultants that's really taken a close look at understanding the economic development, understanding the opportunity to capture some of that growth and potential and what that might mean here for different market sectors, from housing to retail to office and others. He'll provide a little bit of an overview about what that means specific to the area. So with that, Eric, if you'd like to kick us off on the economic development and the real estate, that would be great.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeffrey. Hi, everyone. I'm going to just spend about 5 or 6 minutes going over some of the key findings. This will be high level for the sake of time tonight from our real estate and market assessment that we've done to date. The first thing that we usually want to learn about a community is this a place that's experiencing growth and change? And if it is, to what degree are those changes occurring? And also looking at that in the context of a larger region or a geography. And in the case of Norwalk, it's been and continues to be a growing and thriving city, which is great news. Over the last 10 years, Norwalk's population has been rising consistently year over year, adding between 0.5% to about 0.8% to the overall population. And to put it in perspective, that equates to roughly 400 to 700 new residents a year over the last 10 years, sort of year over year. And Norwalk, compared to the county and the state, is actually growing faster than both of those other larger geographies. And it's also interesting that the city's been adding a lot more middle-income households that may suggest a need for a more diverse range of housing types now and into the future. From a market perspective, really seeing a growing population from our side of things is really a positive, and it means new households are coming to fill maybe existing vacancies in new or existing housing buildings. It's bringing more spending power to local businesses in Norwalk, which are all good things. Next. So for any market assessment that we undertake, we typically try to place our study area within the context of a broader market to try and determine if the trends that we're seeing in that study area are unique to that market, or are they consistent with the broader market trends that we might see in a larger geography. So for this project, we're looking at market and real estate trends at what we're calling the submarket level, which is sort of a little bit bigger than the study area Jeffrey and Jess had introduced at the beginning. And we're comparing that information to the larger geography of the city and the county for context purposes. Next. So as we look at the data points, such as home sale trends, for example, we saw that submarket area really offered a price value option for residents looking to buy in the city of Norwalk. Median sales prices had historically lagged citywide averages by anywhere between $50,000 and $75,000 year over year. But interestingly, by 2020, the year 2020, that gap had closed quite a bit, as you can see in the chart on the right-hand side of the screen. Home sales in the submarket have increased recently as a share of the city's total, and that's really led to an increase in home prices, primarily driven by the sales of older existing homes in that submarket. This also shows from our perspective that there's a lot of interest and desire to live in the submarket, likely driven by housing price points, increased citywide growth, and proximity to the train station. Next. We also looked at rental housing trends and demand, and in recent years noted that there's been an uptick in the number of new rental units in the submarket and in the city as a whole. And I'm sure if you've been to or through the submarket recently, you may have noticed some of that new construction getting out of the ground, mostly in the form of new multifamily or even mixed-use developments, which are projected to add upwards of 450 new units to the submarket over the next few years. As the city's population continues to grow and diversify, that demand for new housing also grows. Next. Nationally, we're seeing a trend of increases in the number of rental housing units built and the number of renter households, which is driving demand for renter housing and also driving prices upward. In Norwalk, over the last 10 years, the home ownership rate has come down as the rental housing rate has come up by about 7% for new demand for rental housing, and median rents per unit are actually up about 31%. The price increases are partially being driven by demand for rental housing, but also the fact that a lot of new product has come online in Norwalk over that period of time, and those units are being offered at rents that are higher than what the city may have seen historically. Next. To better understand office supply and demand, another segment of our market here, we reviewed many different sources for office market performance metrics and found them all to generally be reporting the same story. Vacancy has been on the rise in Norwalk and net absorption has come down a bit. But interestingly, this trend was occurring in the market even before the hit from COVID. There are a lot of questions about the impacts of COVID on the future of office space. And while there's not a ton of agreement, I think, across the industry right now, we do note on the positive side, the city's economic development office has been fielding about twice as many calls per month for smaller office spaces than before COVID. Requests are coming often from tenants looking for space in the 5,000 to 10,000 square foot range or so. The graphic on the bottom right illustrates available leases in two buildings that we selected in the city of Norwalk. The building in illustration on the left is for 383 Main, and it has available spaces, as you can see, for a range of smaller users, for larger users in that case, mostly larger than about 12,500 square feet. The building on the right side is the 383 Main, and that has available spaces for a range of smaller users, many under about 6,000 square feet. We use these two examples to really illustrate office availability in the city and to show that there appears to be ample available space, but the key here is for a variety of users. So as such, it's likely that Norwalk's office market is already really well positioned to capture additional users who may be looking to work locally or even maybe relocate from a different market. This could be very positive, as much of the future demand for office space may be for smaller businesses, smaller offices, particularly those maybe in the health and medical fields. Next. Lastly, RKG evaluated the amount of retail space that could be supported from households currently living within about a 15-minute drive of the South Norwalk train station. Worth noting is our estimates do not currently include the recent opening of stores at the Sono collection, which we believe will fulfill some of the demand for things like clothing and accessories, especially at the larger regional level. But locally, households within that 15-minute drive of the train station could support about 95,000 square feet of additional retail space on top of what's already available today. Given the context of the submarket, we believe, given the walkability of the area, the projected new growth in households, and the proximity to nearby neighborhoods, there should probably really be a focus on locally serving retail, restaurants, and probably some personal services that could be supported in that submarket. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Eric. Appreciate that. Clearly, there's a lot to learn from the different market and economic perspectives. And I think the good news here is that there's a lot that can be capitalized on to foster growth and upside potential for a lot of folks as well. So switching gears from an urban design and from a development perspective, this is really about the physical side of the neighborhood and the character of the neighborhood. We wanted to quickly share with you some brief thoughts about each of those 6 locations that we talked to before. So here's the map that we showed you earlier that has those 6 key sites that we're talking about. When you think about what Eric mentioned on the market side, from housing to retail to office, when you think about these sites in terms of what they offer, in terms of the potential of things that can fit on it, buildings and parking and more access for folks through these sites, let's talk a little bit about the physical side of this location as well. So one of the key areas on both sides of the track here is the west side versus the east side here. I guess it's been really interesting for us to think about access points to the station, points of entry, understanding how the circulation works around the west side of the tracks. We've also done some homework in terms of ownership, land size, and how the current zoning enables certain types of uses to happen on this site as well. So as we go through these drawings and these diagrams, you'll see in the bottom here, just us capturing some of the basic information about ownership, land size, and zoning characteristics, so we know how much can fit on the site over time. When we jump to the other side of the tracks, some of the interesting parts that jump out to us is the operations, the buses, the shuttles, the drop-off, the pickup that happens there, the busyness in the morning and the afternoon, and how can we make sure that we improve upon some of those operations that are there today, in addition to maybe some targeted development as well. When we jump a little bit further to the east side, we've labeled this area private development. It's in around the area of Chestnut Street, and the idea that how that as a neighborhood block and how it relates to Main Street and other activities as you especially go to the east, I think will be an important part of that continued investment and development in that area over time. When we jump a little bit further to the south along the Lexington and Ely area, what's interesting there is the existing buildings, the architecture, the opportunity to really be a transition to the neighborhoods and the historic community to the south as well. That as a transition, and in all of the green areas showing the connectivity to the neighborhood, we feel is going to be very important for the study to address. When we jump across to the west side of the tracks, we know that there's existing development, the housing development site that was put up there more recently. Maybe more projects like the look and scale of that in terms of its size and its density, in terms of its use as well. We jump a little bit further up, there's existing parking lots that are there today. Again, think about in the green about the orientation, the arrival, the circulation in this area. All of those things we think are going to be important as well. Jumping up a little bit further to the north, there's the SNU facility. While much of that building is unoccupied and remains in place, thinking about the long-term redevelopment of that site and how that really can make it an asset for the entire community. And across the street, the area that shows up in orange across MLK Boulevard, the steep topography there, the slopes, the grading, and the vegetation up there, maybe those are indicators about the scale of development and the transitions to those neighborhoods that are up on top of the hill there as well. As we continue further to the north with the Housing Authority site here, very similar themes about entrance points, viewpoints, circulation on that site, and redevelopment, and maybe thinking about how we exceed some of those one-to-one replacement goals and objectives for affordable housing as well. So now we're going to think about another survey from your perspective. So with the market understandings in place from what RKG mentioned, from some of the physical aspects about those 6 sites that we mentioned, we'd love to get your initial feedback about some of the things that you like in terms of maybe development, streetscape, placemaking as well. So we're going to go back to the polling. So if you want to go back to your web link like you had before or on your phone before, same exact setup like last time. So we're going to go back and ask you a couple of questions to see what you like in terms of some of your preferences there. So on this photo, we'd like for you to be able to pick the 3 images that you think is really well suited for any of the sites that we showed you around the train station. And here, there's no right or wrong answer. It's really just understanding the community's preferences about things you like. And here, if you could pick your top 3, it will give us as a team and as a city an understanding about things that you like on these images as well. And when we come back in a few months from right now, we'll try to reflect upon some of these images to see how it resonates with the community as well. Keeping in mind here that zoning lets 4 to 6 stories tall buildings happen, thinking about ground floor uses that might be active retail with a mix of uses above. What's the right development look and feel? So I'm going to close this one in 3, 2, 1. We'll go on to the next slide here. It might take a second for this to pop up onto your website or onto your phone here. But the next poll here is, again, same idea. Pick the 3 that you like the most on this screen here. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. We're just looking to get some initial preferences from you about what you like in terms of the imagery, the scale, the architecture, the character. Great, so I'm going to close this one in 3, 2, 1. Next question, and this might take a second to pop up on the screen here as well. This one's really more about public and outdoor spaces. We recognize that in projects like this, the importance, even if it's small, the limited amount of open space and park space and plaza space that supports the train station, supports the neighborhood and the activities in the area. So we'd love to get your preferences on public and outdoor spaces, and you can pick 3 here as well of your top priorities. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here too, just looking to see where some of the preferences are from the community as well. And I'm going to close this one in 3, 2, 1. And the last slide that we have here, and again, this will take a second to show up here as well. This one's, again, about public and outdoor spaces as well here, and you can click on these at any point in time in terms of understanding what your preferences are. And it might take a second for it to show up on your screen here as well. But different types of open spaces, different types of pedestrian connections and walkability, but love to get your preferences on these ones as well. Excellent. So again, pick your top 3 for this one. Very helpful. And I'm going to close this out in 3, 2, 1. Thank you for participating in that next poll. So with this, Lisa, I'm going to have you join me in a few seconds here. We're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about transportation. And I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. But the idea that transportation and mobility really matters to a study like this within the red area that we show up here. The idea that there's really excellent roadway access and connections, especially along Washington Street and out throughout East Norwalk. The idea that MLK Junior Drive is really close by here, and understanding some of those connections to the west and to the points that are north of the study area. Those roads really matter. Interstate 95, pretty close proximity to there for regional access. That's a great amenity and assets here. And then the idea that there's a lot of local streets that really provide connectivity to the surrounding neighborhoods through that street network as well. What does that really mean? It really means that a project like this needs to be focused on access, on safety, connectivity and convenience for people to be able to move to and throughout the whole neighborhood from a traffic and from a mobility perspective as well. Our team has also spent some time looking through prior documents and studies and initiatives that the city has undertaken to upgrade a lot of the infrastructure, from the bike infrastructure in terms of where those bike lanes are in downtown and throughout the city, and understanding where's limitations on some of that bike infrastructure, as well as where there's some proposed improvements to some of those bike facilities. And also that it might come in different forms and shapes and sizes that you'd see in terms of a bike network that would connect everybody. Also, from a sidewalk network perspective, we spent a lot of time thinking about the existing connectivity. Can people walk from point A to point B? There's fair to good conditions for many of those sidewalks, but we also know that there's need to really make some improvements. There's some obstructions, there's some limitations and need for really upgrading some of the walking network that's in the area. We'd love to hear from you tonight about some of the mobility on that front as well. And then lastly, parking really plays into this in terms of the train station area, as well as development and neighborhood needs for temporary parking as well. Just know that we've started to document a lot of the parking facilities around the area, and knowing that parking is really going to be a key towards the success of the future. Lisa, from a transit perspective, if you'd like to give us a little bit of an overview.
Sure. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. So this project is an opportunity to examine and improve the delivery and coordination between transit services and the other transportation modes that Jeffrey just mentioned. On this slide, there are many components of transit that we are interested in improving and focusing on in this neighborhood. We'll be examining these components as we develop a sound transportation plan for the community. We want to make sure that you can easily and safely access the train station and the surrounding neighborhood, as well as Greater Norwalk. As we work through these components with your input, yes, there's another poll coming, we will create a balance between transportation, including all of the modes, and development in this neighborhood. Next slide. To help us, we'd like even more of your input tonight on how the transportation network is working for you and what is important to you, including things like transit connections, the bus and shuttle facilities, drop off and pick up, biking and walking, and even just driving in and around the neighborhood. What is important to you? We'd love to hear from you. And now I'm going to turn it back to Jeffrey for a poll.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Lisa. So transportation is a very big item here as well. And again, we're going to go back to a couple more polls here. This one, again, it might take a minute to load up on your phone here about the idea about mobility and streets. And again, you can pick any of the three that you like the most here. Again, these are intentionally focused on the words that show up on these pictures. So from bikes to crosswalks to sidewalks, wayfinding, which is basically signage, understanding about making active sidewalks for the users that are out there, and in the bottom right about really accommodation for bikes. So where do the bikes go through the neighborhood? Let us know a little bit about your priorities for the area by picking the three that you think is going to be most important for the South Norwalk train station area. Excellent. Okay, I can see that this is settling in here. So I'm going to close this one in 3, 2, 1. Similar question, and again, this might take a minute to show up on your screen here as it's loading. This one's really about transportation and streetscape. So what happens up on the sidewalk and some of the amenities there, from scooters and bikes to having canopies that really protect people from the elements and from the rain and the snow, seating areas as under C, perhaps bus shelters under D. E is really about community art and history. This is an example that shows some reuse of some old structures and architecture from the past. And then F is really about seating and perhaps benches and those amenities for the public. Let us know your preferences on those as well. Again, you can pick 3 here. And again, no right or wrong answer, just looking to see where some of the preferences are for this as well, so that we can get more focused in the next part of our study. All right, and let's close this one in 3, 2, 1. Excellent. So with that, we're going to open this up for general discussion. We want to take the first half an hour to 45 minutes just to go over a little bit of what we know so far, engage you in some of those initial polls to understand where some of your preferences are. And for the next about 45 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer, we'd love to have a conversation with you, just listening about some of your concerns, some of your opportunities, some of your wish list items for this area, so we can learn a lot from the different public's perspective as well. So in terms of how this is going to work, what we're going to do is, for those that have joined on the Zoom platform, you can find your raise the hand feature in here as well. And through that raise the hand feature on your Zoom dashboard, you're able to raise your hand. What I'm going to be able to do is invite you to come off of mute. You can join the conversation, and you could tell us a little bit about your comment as well. And then I'll go on to the next person. We also have the chat feature opened, and people can use the chat feature to be able to give us a comment. So really, we're looking to get as many comments from the public tonight about things you like, things you don't like, some of your wish list items as well. And what we're going to be doing is looking to really populate that as much as you can. So use the chat feature, again, under your Zoom dialog box. You'll be able to find that there, as well as raise your hand, and I'll invite you to come off of mute and state your comment as well. For our translators that are in the translation rooms right now, what we're going to ask the translators to do is, if you have a comment, those that are speaking in different languages, write your question in your language, and the translators, they will actually take those comments that you've written in the chat function, and they'll translate that for us so that we get that on the record as well. So again, in the chat rooms that are based on languages, write your comment into the chat in your native language. We will then ask our translators to be able to translate them, and they'll show up on the screen, and we'll read a few of those out as well. So with that, let's open up the chat and let's open up the conversation. And if anyone has raised their hand, I'd like to go to them and invite them to come off of mute and join the conversation as well. So I have a Tanner who's raised the hand. Tanner, I'm going to invite you to come off of mute and join the conversation. You need to look for that invite from me and come off mute. So Tanner, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tanner. So first of all, I raised my hand because you invited us to submit things via chat, but it was disabled, but it looks like it has been re-enabled. So thank you for that. Yeah, so I live pretty close to the station. I live actually not in the study area, but just up on Golden Hill. Before the pandemic, I was commuting to the city on the train and walking. Oh yeah, thanks for pulling the map up. So just to the west, or to the left of MLK there, up that hill, I'm about an 8-minute walk from the train station. And before the pandemic, I did that walk every day, as did my wife. She commuted to New Haven, and I commuted to New York. And we both did that walk every day. I remember some of my first impressions of the station when I started commuting was that it seemed to be very oriented around people driving to the station and parking there. And I noticed that because I was not doing that. But I think that there's a lot of potential here to make the station a more friendly environment for people who are approaching it on foot or on a bike. Occasionally when I was late or when I had other errands to run, I would ride my bike and park it. The bikes are certainly not treated as first-class citizens. There's a couple tiny bike racks, and the bike rack that's inside the garage is at the far end of the garage. And there's very little signage, whereas there's all sorts of signage, and it's obvious that there's plenty of room for cars there. I think in particular that the east side of the station, where there's currently a surface parking lot, that could be engaged much better as a pedestrian plaza, providing a lot more of a seamless transition between the train station and the general South Norwalk area. I think South Norwalk in general has a lot of potential for being bike friendly. It's very flat and it's quite dense, and it's becoming denser. So I think that working with the city, that should be a focus area to make sure that people who live there can get around and run their errands on a bike, and ideally live without a car. And I think part of that, a crucial part of that, will be making sure that the station is somewhere where people can can come on their bike, where they can leave their bike, that they are confident that it's secure. Ideally, that people could rent a bike or, check a bike out from a bike share program there. Yeah, I don't want to take all the time, but those are my high level thoughts. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those comments. Really appreciate it. You brought up a lot of interesting points and perspectives, especially as someone who lives and walks through the neighborhood. So appreciate that comment as well. So I'm going to invite Robert next to join the conversation. Robert, if you look for an invite from me to come off mute, you can join the conversation.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate it. I am a 40-year property owner in South Norwalk, and my kids grew up there, went to the magnet school on Chestnut Street. And the properties I own are at the corner of Monroe and South Main. We call them these days Sono Lodges. And my perspective, therefore, is somewhat historic, but I'm concerned obviously about the future for South Norwalk as well. And I would endorse very strongly the previous comments about increasing the bike friendliness of South Norwalk. And it is a beautiful part of the city for bicycles as well as pedestrians. That said, a huge challenge today and probably for the longer term is adequate parking. We simply, and I speak for, I guess, myself, but many business owners find that there is inadequate parking. Much of the problem is because parking was eliminated as development has come through South Norwalk. The train station is a potential great resource. The police headquarters now has a surface lot that is supposed to be for headquarters visitors only, but it's become sort of free parking for those who are daring enough. That presents an opportunity to do something more intensive, I think. So I'm speaking basically in favor of trying to do more with both bike and pedestrian friendly development, but I think it starts with getting the cars parked in a way that isn't obtrusive. So I advocate for that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those comments, and thank you for the history in the area as well. Really appreciate that as well. And I'll encourage anyone who else would like to join the conversation just to find on that Zoom platform the raise your hand function, and we'll call on you as well. And let's go over to the chat function to see if we have some comments that are showing up here as well. Want to see clean industry along MLK and near Chestnut so folks can be paid livable wage, walk, bike to work, agree with Tanner, revive Lexington Avenue as thriving mixed economic residential commercial land use. So thank you for that comment as well. Appreciate that. And another comment here was most important to have parking employees will be more courteous and helpful. They will not answer questions. They have given me wrong information, unfortunately. Sorry to hear about that. They have told me that they're not responsible for giving information to people at the station. So clearly about operations and information and sharing those things is going to be important as well. So thank you for sharing that on that comment as well. So I do not have anyone that's raised their hand or more comments coming in here as well. And I just remind our translators in our breakout sessions that you can relay that people that are joining in other languages, they can actually write in their language, native language, and we can use your translation services to translate those comments through the chat function here as well. And then maybe, Brian, let me go back to you. Any interesting observations that you've had so far in terms of the study area and some of the things that we've been thinking about as a team, just to get you into the conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And for some of you, just as a note, I've been responding to some of the questions we received in chat as well. I do want to just let everyone know if there are any outstanding questions, I'm available via email. We'll provide the contact information as needed for follow-ups on all of this. But I think, no, I appreciate the presentation, Jeff, and I appreciate everyone's feedback here. You know, as I said at the beginning, there's a tremendous opportunity for us to sort of reshape and reposition the future of the South Norwalk Train Station, particularly as it relates to the publicly controlled assets on the western side of the tracks. So the comments regarding connectivity and access and, trying to make it more accommodating to all users, and then also some of the questions I responded to regarding green infrastructure. These are all things that we're going to be looking at. And this is really the opening session for us to hear back from you all in terms of things that you think we should be considering. So the more comments that we get, I think is the better. So I think something actually just came in from David Hubelman regarding sustainability and green building. So, taking a look at creating a more pedestrian and bike friendly area to tend to our tree canopy, solar and other energy needs as we move forward. So yes, so that was actually one of the questions I responded to in writing separately, is that, green infrastructure is going to be an integral part of what we're looking at. So when we make recommendations for complete streets style improvements, it's obviously accommodating the user network, the transportation network, but also the environmental conditions that exist in the area. And that's really what the complete street is designed to do. Accommodate all users, including the environment. So we are going to be, taking a very close look at that.
That's great. And maybe Jess, let me bring you in here for a second as more comments are coming in here. Any initial observations about the study area or some of the comments so far?
It was, yeah, absolutely. So seeing a lot of comments related to parking and also bike infrastructure, which I think is great to see. I did notice in some of the photo polling that was done, a real emphasis on green space and open space and also public realm. And I noticed that a number of the votes that did come in focused on some of the photos that had more greenery and more of the tree canopy in those particular visual photos. So I really interesting to see the polling come in, and also, the comments that do speak to enhancing public realm and connectivity and walkability, but then also, really well taken comment in the sense of parking needs to be an important place there so that we put the cars where they need to be so that we can open up some of the spaces to the public and increase access. So really great takeaways so far.
Excellent. Thank you for that as well. So let me go through a couple more of the comments that have come in here as well. About from Robert, another comment about believing that priority number one is to have adequate but unobtrusive parking. We talked a lot about that parking, getting that balance right. If you remember in the early part of our conversation, you cannot have development without parking. It's hard to get on a train without some parking too. So finding the right balance in that parking is really going to be important for this as well. He goes on to state that he thinks that they need like 30 to 50% greater parking capacity between Washington Street and the 4 to 5 blocks south. So we're going to be looking carefully at those 6 areas that I showed you on the screen here to understand the economic development and growth potential, as well as the parking supply as well. So parking is really going to be critical. So thank you for that question and comment. Next one was about ensuring the area includes green building design. And I know Brian just touched on that as well. So we're going to be looking at this really as a great opportunity to have a neighborhood brand, look, feel, character, green infrastructure. So great comments about that. And sorry we didn't do a deeper dive on some of the green infrastructure part of it tonight, but really good comment on that part as well. We have another comment about here about speaking to what the plan is for the portion of Ely Avenue. What is the proposed area? So I might come back to Jess or to Brian about any updates about the Ely Avenue area, if we have any information to share on that. If not, we can do a little bit of research and come back at our next public meeting as well. Next comment here is used to commute to New York City, but the cost to park on the Sono train station is extremely high relative to our weight. Yeah, so that's an interesting comment as well. Obviously, the cost of parking and taking the train and so forth on a regular basis, whether you're a commuter that comes in and parks and rides and go in or walk to the station. So parking is going to really continue to play a key role in that, as well as maybe thinking about other modes of transportation like bicycling, walking to the station, the shuttle buses in the area. That as a whole system really can help address some of those issues as well. Thank you for the comment about the Q&A. We'll go there in a few seconds to address some of those comments that are posted there as well. A few more comments here. Can we assure that clean renewable energy is part of the baseline development? Ensure vest pocket parks are included in all areas and intentionally designed to reduce heat island effects. A lot of great comments there as well. So the idea about energy, renewable energy, with the limited development area that's in here, All of those open spaces are really going to be important in terms of how they're operating and performing. So we're really going to be looking carefully at those from those perspectives as well. And the idea about heat island effect, that really speaks to sustainability and resiliency in addressing some of those issues. So thank you for that comment.
Hey, Jeff, could I just
Yeah.
jump in real quick? And I think Jess had something to mention too in regards to the Eli question that you posed.
Yeah, let's go back to that one. Thank you,
I think
Brian.
what it is, there's a couple questions that I'm seeing in terms of, what are the proposed developments and what's going on right now. I think this is really the starting point. So we're really not at that point yet to make those recommendations. What we're trying to sort of assess what the overall need is, so we can try to reform it and balance, as I spoke about sort of at the beginning of the presentation in that regard. So just kind of providing a little additional context in terms of where we are at in the process. This is obviously the first engagement that we have. But Jess, I don't know if you had anything on that Ely Avenue question.
Thanks, Brian. I was going to make some more comments that that part of the exercise that we're going through is to really help understand that balance, right? And I think that's a big part of this. And it doesn't just need to relate to housing. It could be office and retail. It could be educational institutions. It could be, I think that the sky is the limit here. And when it comes to Ely Ave, I know that we've been doing a lot of work in that neighborhood with the neighborhood improvement program, and the neighborhood improvement coordinator has been spending a lot of time in Ely Ave, doing a lot of cleanup and putting out garbage cans, and also talking to the neighbors and also the retail establishments there. And I don't think that we have anything set in particular for any of the districts, but what I would like to see as part of this exercise is that we do a really great job in enhancing the connectivity and making sure that that we not only have the areas within the study area connected. And sometimes that's tough, right? And sometimes when we see rail running through a neighborhood, or we see rail running through different areas, it tends to have a little bit of a divide because it's a man-made track. And so what I think this exercise and this plan is meant to do is really ensure that the east side and the west side are connected, but also that the northern portion and the southern portion of the study area are also connected. And then even beyond that, that our study area is actually connected with the surrounding neighborhood as well. So, I can't answer specifically, much like Brian's comment on the study area, but to a certain extent, I'm excited to have the conversation happen so we can really talk about what's possible here.
Great. Thank you for that, Jess, too. There's a good conversation going on here about parking, also about the need for handicap parking here as well, and how that creates some issues, ideas about really getting the public transportation and the connectivity to the surrounding neighborhood and to the city. And really the idea about, if we can do that, you can lessen the traffic. There's a good comment here about realizing that, yes, it would be catered all to the cars and to the parking, that what about the other things here too? So how can we really get the right balance there in terms of the parking supply and demand, and maybe not overdo it on the parking side based on all the other things that could happen here? As we've started to look through this whole project area, literally site by site, it's been interesting to see some of the challenges that need to be overcome as we go through the area, and some of the opportunities that really can be leveraged moving forward. So the idea of these kind of vying for parking versus placemaking versus building economic development, about public space, about transit, all of those equations, and as Brian mentioned, getting the balance right is really going to be important. In the end of the day, we're really looking for this master plan. And again, as Brian mentioned, we haven't drawn anything yet here to be able to really show all of the potential that this area has to do to bring the neighborhood together, improve walkability, bike accommodations, transit accommodations, economic development growth, mixing the uses, affordability. So there's a lot of potential to kind of get out of these sites here. And we're really looking forward to starting to create some options that we'll be doing over the next few months that can explore some of the things that we're talking about tonight. But again, we haven't started to draw anything here. Tonight's really about listening about some of your preferences as well. So thank you for all the comments. Let me jump over to the Q&A and just maybe look at a couple of the questions there. I think, Brian, I think you've answered some of them as we've gone through here as well. Would like to see decorative sidewalk and street lights to ensure safety in the surrounding neighborhoods around certain neighborhood streets. Great. meant to say paved sidewalks and brighter streetlights. Yeah, so the idea of supporting whatever happens here with really quality streets, street lights, and street furniture as we go through that to really make sure it's connected, I think that'll be important as well. So thank you for those comments. So anyone else would like to join in via going off mute and having some of your comments verbally here, feel free to raise your hand and we'll go back to that as well.
Just want to say thank you to everyone who is commenting, because this is exactly what we are looking for, right? We're looking for these ideas of decorative sidewalks, brighter streetlights, paved sidewalks. So the green roofs, green infrastructure, the need for parking, the need for additional bike lanes. This is exactly what we were hoping to gather in this particular meeting. And so I really want to thank everybody for participating, and also encourage others that have any ideas and recommendations to feel free to continue offering feedback.
That's great. Thank you for that, Jess. And a couple more here about some comments about contamination and cleanup on the sites as well. So we're going to be looking through some of the prior history of these sites to understand if there's any issues around that in terms of contaminated sites as well. Another one here about, what are we proposing? So actually, we're not proposing anything for these sites yet. We're really here to listen. There was a comment about, are we proposing housing on all 6 of the sites? It's really looking for the community to understand some of those preferences, but also understand, as Eric had mentioned in his presentation about the market assessment, understanding what those market forces are, where the potential is to capture some of that market, to be able to bring some of that development here so that it's feasible and that we can afford to have it in those places and not have to subsidize everything that goes in this area. The idea of the market combined with the sites and community preferences, we're going to be looking at that in a very balanced way as well. So let me see here. This comment here about fruit trees in a way for the community to become going back to the roots, stock. So I'm just trying to see if there's any other comments here that were noteworthy. I'm not seeing many others here as well. So I guess with that, why don't we do this? If people can continue to use the chat feature here as well. What I might do now is go back to the PowerPoint presentation. We have another poll before we close out for the evening. I will go back to that the polling exercise there, and then before we close out for the evening, we'll go back to the chat to see if we got a few more comments here as well. But keep on filling that up with more comments. We really appreciate that, as Jess had mentioned as well. So let me move forward with the presentation here and go on to the next couple of slides as well. So our last polling exercise for the evening, and this might take a little bit of thinking on your part as well. We'd like to actually go back to that question that we asked you early in the evening. Based on what we've heard in terms of the 6 sites from Lisa on the transit side, from Eric on the market side, as well as Brian and Jess in their introductory statement, let's fill out this poll here in terms of what people think are the highest and most important part. Maybe your answers have changed since earlier in this evening as well. Just like before, you can pick your top 3. What are going to be the most important to move forward with now that we've learned a little bit more about the neighborhoods and about the site area as well? And again, you can pick the top 3 here for this option as well. Again, it's about drop off, pickup, buses, parking, walking, biking, places for people, retail and office and economic development, all of the above, or not sure. It'll just be interesting to compare if any of these presentations has changed anyone's minds or informed different things as well. Great. So let's close this one in 3, 2, 1. Okay, now we have another one. And this one is an open-ended response. And the key thing is here is using one word, not 3 or 4 words, but using one word. So the question here is, what one word best describes the biggest issue for the South Norwalk train station area? So at any point in time, you can type that one word in here, hit enter on your phone or on your, and the idea will pop up on the screen. And the more people have that same word, the bigger the word that's going to get here as well. So perhaps in our conversation this evening, maybe we missed certain words that matter to you as the community, as a resident, as a business owner. We'd love to make sure that this plan reflects your words, your thinking about how you'd like the neighborhood to continue to evolve around the train station as well. And all of these words will be really inspiring to us as a team as we start to think through different development options and placemaking options and improvement to transit as well. So connectivity, as it's starting to emerge as one of the bigger items here, you know, not having a connected community poses some pretty big challenges at many levels as well. I like that we're seeing the words equity and walkability and housing here too. Those are really important in terms of living in a neighborhood as well. And you can put more than one word in here as well. So if you like to put a couple of words in here, or if you like a word that someone else put in here, feel free to add a second or a third word in here. The idea that this is really going to give us some words to aspire to over the next couple of months as well. And let me give that just a few more seconds there as we navigate this. And you can see as the priorities or the number of times people have used a word, they're getting bigger and shuffling around here in terms of number of times people using the same exact word as well. Welcoming. And I saw the word gentrification come up there as well. And that's actually, I'm glad that someone put that word in there too. You know, we're really sensitive to the idea that with new development comes issues around affordability, gentrification, and how people are going to continue to stay and live in their neighborhood. We're really aware of how important that whole process is and making sure that there's homes for people to stay here as well. So thank you for putting that word in here as well. Great. So I'm sure we could probably lead us up for the next half an hour or so and get a lot more words here. So we're going to ask you to shift gears here and think about it less about the biggest issue and maybe more about the biggest opportunity, right? So how do we make an issue into an opportunity? What are the words that we can aspire to really bring this area to life? And it already has a great life to it, but the idea of bringing it further vitality to the neighborhood as well. So whenever you're ready, you can fill in words about the opportunity side of this district. Again, focusing on the train station area and those sites that we talked about. So sustainability, we did have a lot of conversations this evening about sustainability and about green infrastructure. Placemaking and diversity, great words there as well. You know, it's often that when you do a plan around a station that it has to be really diverse. If you think about transit and placemaking and walking and biking and bus shuttles and all of those things and all of the people and the residents and businesses, the diversity really comes to mind in terms of some of those issues that we're going to have to embrace as we go through here as well. So let's intentionally give this one another 20 or 30 seconds of filling this up with as many words as possible here. Because this, again, it'll be things that we're going to aspire to over the next few months. The word welcoming is actually interesting too, in terms of, do you feel like you've reached home after getting off the train and walking through the neighborhood? How welcome you are to the neighborhood? Does it feel friendly and so forth? Very good. And the word historic, you know, we spent a little bit of time talking earlier this evening about the wonderful historic neighborhood to the south and the neighborhoods and the buildings there too. The idea of tapping into the history and celebrating that. We've heard a lot about that to date as well. So thank you for sharing those words. Okay, well, let's bring this one to a close in 3, 2, last chance to get your last word in here, 1, and we'll close that one out as well. So thank you for that. So a little bit about next steps. I'll forecast this and maybe go back to a couple more questions here as well. As Jess and Brian had mentioned, we're really thankful for all the comments this evening that we've got, and thank you for all the different polls that you all participated in this evening. It really gives us that initial indicators of where your preferences are as well. Again, before we draw anything, it's great to understand what we should focus on. So what's ahead of us is over the next few weeks, we're going to finish our what's called existing conditions chapter of our work, where we've been doing a lot of homework just to understand the sites, their physical attributes, the market perspective, the transit operations. We're going to come to closure on that within the next couple of weeks. After that, we're going to start to develop some alternatives where we're going to test out those 6 sites, see how much can fit on there. We will kind of look at it from a parking perspective, placemaking perspective, economic development perspective, putting in some transit routes and so forth to enhance that area as well. So really attacking it from multiple perspectives and the alternatives. Once we do that, we're going to test the feasibility of it. We always like to say that it's easy to draw a pretty picture that we might fall in love with, but the idea of testing the feasibility, making sure you can afford it, the constructability, and how you implement it will be really important as well. So that testing of the feasibility is going to be important. And then lastly, we're going to create an action plan. And that action plan will have things that'll be specific to maybe some of those sites. Especially the ones that there's more public involvement versus private involvement. They might set some certain strategies in there or some economic development opportunities in there. We don't quite know what's going to be in that action plan other than there'll probably be site by site some suggestions as well as some district-wide suggestions about moving forward with this area as well. And we're planning to come back to the community one more time to talk about some of the outcomes of some of those development alternatives and some of those, the testing, the feasibility, and some of those actions as well. So looking forward to more feedback on that as well. So before we close out, I'm not sure, Brian or Jess, if you've noticed any more comments that come in that might be worthwhile making a quick note on before we close out for the evening. Anything jump to mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to, of course, reiterate the thanks for everyone participating in tonight's event. It's very helpful for us. This is exactly what we needed to kind of advance the study and get a better frame around the work that we're doing. I think there's been a couple of questions about general logistics regarding how people can perhaps comment after this or get us feedback. You know, like I said, this is the first step in a series of engagements. So we're going to have multiple opportunities for you all to participate and provide feedback along the way. You can see the project page. It is available on the Norwalk Tomorrow website. It's tomorrow.norwalkt.org. You can also access notices for the public meetings on our website, Norwalk Redevelopment Agency.org, or the City of Norwalk website. So we're trying to post it in a number of locations. And on there, we will upload functionality and contact information for who you could reach out to with comments that you think of after this meeting. So we want to make sure that you know this is an ongoing process and comments are welcome along the way. So I don't know if Jess, if you wanted to say something as well, but you're more than welcome to.
Thanks, Brian. Just wanted to point out a couple of the comments. One was a question on funding, and I think we have a real opportunity here to marry public and private funding. We have a number of different stakeholders, as was represented in the map that Jeffrey had shown at the beginning of the presentation. And so, you know, I think that we will be looking to all of our partners, state partners, federal partners, and also different folks that are around the table. So wanted to address that. And then also saw a comment on connectivity and really improving transit access in and out of South Norwalk. And so I just wanted to comment that that's also something that we've been thinking a lot about, and a really, really helpful comment. So to second Brian's comments, thanks to everybody who's participated, really helpful to be able to get a snapshot on what you're thinking about. And, you know, thanks to Jeffrey and his team for being able to help poll and help to use the photos to really get a lot of really positive feedback that we can look at and move forward through this process. So thank you to Brian for coordinating and organizing, and thanks to everybody for taking the time.
Great. Yeah, so we're really excited about next steps. This has been really helpful for us just to listen in and see where the priorities are. Please continue with the comments, as Brian mentioned, through following up through the website as well that's posted on the screen right now. Looking forward to learning more and coming back in a few months with some options that we can share as well to get additional feedback. So this is just the start of the conversation as well. So with that, I think, Brian, anything else to close us out for the night?
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you,
Excellent.
everybody.
All right, well, with that, we're going to close out the meeting, and thank you for your participation. We really appreciate it, especially for all the survey taking tonight. A lot of data that we've collected, and we're looking forward to the next meeting. And thanks once again, and have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Messages,